know how difficult it is to go an entire football season without losing a game? In modern football, the top 5 leagues have only seen this happen 3 times. Xabi Alonso's Leverkusen, Antonio Conte's Juventus, and, well, Arsene Wenger's Arsenal. And if you look at the entire history of English football, there's only one other team who was able to do this, that being Preston North End in 1889, over 130 years ago. But what makes this even more remarkable is the period of football Wenger did it in, because Arsenal were not the dominant force in England, as this was done right in the middle of Sir Alex Ferguson's reign of English football, making this an almost impossible task. But somehow, a nerdy manager from France was able to assemble one of the greatest squads in football history to complete the most impossible season in English history. So the question remains, how on earth was this possible? Well, to understand that, we have to start this story right before Arsene Wenger arrived in London, because Arsenal was in a strange situation. You see, Arsenal were one of the biggest clubs in the country, and through the late 80s and early 90s, they were led by manager George Graham, who became one of their greatest coaches, leading Arsenal to a famous 1989 league title where they beat Liverpool 2-0 on the final day of the season to win the league for the first time in almost 2 decades. Graham also went on to win the European Cup Winners' Cup in 1994, beating Parma in the final. But as much as we know Wenger's Arsenal for beautiful attacking football, this team played in a very different style. Simply put, it was boring, as it was built around the most solid defense in England that in one season conceded just 18 goals, with England national team goalkeeper David Seaman behind a back four of Lee Dixon, Martin Keown, Nigel Winterburn, and club captain Tony Adams. This team had perfected the offside trap that would often win games by just a single goal, usually scored by Ian Wright, whilst their rivals would chant, "Boring, boring Arsenal." But that boredom soon turned into scandal, as George Graham was found to have taken an illegal payment from an agent to sign their player, meaning he was banned from football for a year and sacked by Arsenal in 1995. Then entered Bruce Rioch, who took charge for a year before getting the sack in 1996, ending an unremarkable time with the Gunners. Now at this time, the Premier League was turning into a dynasty, as Alex Ferguson had now won 4 out of the last 5 league titles with Manchester United, and Arsenal fans were not enjoying this. The fans demanded a top coach from the Premier League, the Serie A or La Liga, to come in to bring them glory. But shockingly, they ended up hiring a manager whose last job had been in Japan. Arsene Wenger had a rather unremarkable playing career, but had made his name as manager of Monaco, where he won the French League in 1989 and reached the 1992 Cup Winners' Cup final and even the semi-final of the Champions League. At this time, he met with Arsenal's vice chairman David Dane and became good friends, but despite having plenty of offers from other European sides, Wenger decided his next job would be in Japan, where he took over the worst side in the J-League, Nagoya Grampus 8, who had just finished bottom of the league. But Wenger changed the club's philosophy, making them think for themselves on the pitch, and their form turned around, with Nagoya going on a winning run to finish second in the J-League, winning the Emperor's Cup and the Japanese Super Cup. And so David Dean pushed Arsenal's board to hire him, and eventually after Rioch's failure, the board agreed and decided to bring Arsene Wenger back from Japan to North London to become the first Frenchman to ever manage in the Premier League. But instantly, question marks arose about this French manager with his nerdy look landing in England. Was he really capable of fighting back against Ferguson's unstoppable Man United? And was he capable of turning a boring Arsenal into something better? Wenger wasn't the only Frenchman to arrive at Highbury in 1996, as he approved the signing of Rémi Gaudet and Patrick Vieira that summer, ready for his arrival, with French striker Nicolas Anelka also joining the following January. But the start of the 96-97 season was pure chaos, as Rioch was sacked just before the start of the season, and Wenger was still under contract at Nagoya, so couldn't actually join Arsenal until late September, and lots of media outlets were questioning his CV and whether Le Professeur could adapt to English football. Wenger's first game in charge didn't come until October, when Arsenal beat Blackburn Rovers 2-0, playing with a 3-5-2 formation with Vieira at the base of the midfield alongside Paul Merson and David Platt, and that in Wenger's third game in charge, he came up against former Arsenal manager George Graham, who had finished his ban and was now at Leeds United. But a 3-0 win with early goals from Dixon and Bergkamp showed without a doubt that Wenger was now the big man at Highbury. And while Wenger often still played with the back four, he looked to play a more possession-based, fluid style of football. And the Frenchman also set about changing Arsenal's culture, making sure that there was competition for places in the first team so everyone was always on their toes. He also made huge changes to the players' fitness and diets, including pushing players to eat healthy foods and avoid red meat or junk food, and even removed Mars bars from the dressing room. But more than that, he sought to end the boozy drinking culture at Arsenal, whose stars like Tony Adams and Paul Merson had been afflicted by alcohol problems by banning the players from drinking together, saying, "I don't see how a player who drinks regularly can survive in football." Adams said that Wenger helped him quit alcohol altogether, and Wenger even went further, encouraging players to get injections of vitamins and creatine to help their recovery, as he did everything possible to make sure his players were at the top of their game. Wenger was a football obsessive, and despite initial doubts from the players, the start under Wenger was red hot, and Arsenal even climbed to the top of the Premier League by mid-December until crucial losses to Liverpool and Newcastle later in the season meant that, despite having the league's tightest defense, the Gunners finished third, but this was only just the start of something great that Wenger was building. That summer, Wenger added even more French players to his dressing room as he revamped his midfield, concluding that there wasn't enough creativity there to score the goals needed the previous season, so Paul Merson was sold to Middlesbrough and Emmanuel Petit was one of the 3 players who joined from Monaco, with Arsenal also adding Dutch wizard Mark Overmars from Ajax for £7 million. And Arsenal started the 97-98 season on fire, going unbeaten in their first 12 games, including a 4-0 thrashing of West Ham, a 4-1 win over Bolton, and a 5-0 demolition on Barnsley that briefly put them top of the league, with Ian Wright banging in 9 goals, including a hat-trick against Bolton, and Dennis Bergkamp scoring 10, including a hat-trick against Leicester. But then the wheels came off as Arsenal started November with a 3-0 loss against Derby. The next game was a powerhouse showdown against Manchester United, and while Arsenal went 2-0 up at home, United pegged them back to 2-2 before David Platt scored with a header late in the game to win it for Arsenal. Alex Ferguson came out after the match to say the result meant that the title race was not just a one-horse race for Manchester United, as he accepted this was going to be a battle between his United and Wenger's Arsenal for the league title that season. But that win would be Arsenal's only win in November, and a poor run of 4 losses from 6 games before Christmas saw Arsenal slide down the league to as low as 6th in the table, and by the start of January, Arsenal were already 12 points behind Manchester United. But boring Arsenal were back, as the Gunners kept a league record 8 clean sheets in a row, with their defense as solid as a rock, and amid that run was another clash against Manchester United, where Arsenal kept the likes of Andy Cole, Teddy Sheringham, and David Beckham quiet for 90 minutes, and Mark Overmars scored the only goal of the game for the Gunners to win 1-0, meaning the title race was back on. Ferguson, moaning about fixture congestion, claimed Wenger knew nothing about English football and said it was inevitable that Arsenal would drop points, but Arsenal just kept winning, and in April, they thumped Wimbledon 5-0 to go top of the Premier League. And somehow, they just kept on going, winning 10 matches in a row, and on May 3rd, in front of a packed Highbury crowd, Arsenal beat Everton 4-0 to become only the 3rd team since the start of the Premier League to lift the league's trophy, and Arsene Wenger made history as the first non-British manager to lead a team to win the league, and somehow managing to dethrone the great Alex Ferguson. If the Premier League title wasn't enough, Arsenal had found themselves in an FA Cup final after scraping past Port Vale in the 3rd round, before beating Middlesbrough, Palace, and West Ham to play Newcastle in the final. Overmars and Nicolas Anelka got the goals as Arsenal won 2-0 to complete the double of winning the league and the FA Cup to cap off a glorious season. Now, these 2 titles truly marked a change in English football, as Wenger brought something different to the game. He made his teams play elegant football with foreign flair, but as impressive as he was this season, the very best was still yet to come. Despite just winning a title, Arsenal needed to also rebuild, with club record scorer Ian Wright leaving for West Ham and David Platt retiring. And this is when Wenger really started to make the squad his own, bringing in Freddie Ljungberg and Nwankwo Kanu as their replacements. And this new era started in emphatic fashion as Arsenal took on rivals Manchester United in the Charity Shield and won the game 3-0 to become the first team from the south of England to win the Charity Shield since the 1960s. The 2 sides would be neck and neck all through the 98-99 season, as Arsenal once again struggled in November but picked up form after Christmas, going undefeated from December 20th until May to go top of the table with just 5 games left. In the FA Cup, Arsenal faced Manchester United in the semi-final in a clash of the Titans, and the pair drew 0-0, so the match was replayed, and this time, Beckham scored first for United before Bergkamp equalized. But right at the end, Manchester United's Roy Keane got sent off, and Arsenal got a penalty. Bergkamp missed from 12 yards, so the match went to extra time, and Ryan Giggs scored a wonder goal to win the match for United, causing fans to invade the pitch as Wenger described this defeat as a trauma. United's momentum then took them over the line as Arsenal lost 1-0 to Leeds, and United won the Premier League by a single point, and even went on to win the Champions League, making for a treble-winning season, as Alex Ferguson had truly reclaimed his throne, meaning heading into that summer, Wenger had some work to do. Arsenal sold Nikola Anelka to Real Madrid for almost £25 million and replaced him with Davor Šuker and one other player from Juventus called Thierry Henry. This signing was good at the time, but nobody, and I mean nobody, had an idea of quite the terror Henry was about to impose on English football, because Thierry had struggled at Juventus and didn't score in his first 8 games at Arsenal, as he had difficulty adapting to the English game. But Arsene Wenger was absolutely convinced that Henry was something special, that he had the va-va-voom. But while Manchester United ran away with the 1999-2000 season, Arsenal had better luck in the UEFA Cup, beating Werder Bremen in the quarterfinals and Lyon in the semis to reach the final in Copenhagen against Turkish side Galatasaray. Unfortunately, the match finished 0-0 and went to penalties, and Davor Šuker and Patrick Vieira missed their spot kicks, and Wenger missed out on European glory. So, Šuker left Arsenal that summer, along with Overmars and Petit, who both moved to Barcelona in a double swoop, replaced by Edu and Robert Pire. The following season was once again dominated by United, and although Thierry Henry scored this wonder goal, chipping the ball up, then lobbing the goalkeeper for possibly the best of his career to beat United at Highbury, the Red Devils humiliated Arsenal 6-1 at Old Trafford later in the season to effectively win the title. But Ferguson had now angered Arsene Wenger by attempting to sign Arsenal's star midfielder Patrick Vieira without contacting Arsenal first, and this just added fuel to the fire growing inside of Arsene Wenger. But in the summer of 2001, Arsenal would make a shocking transfer of their own as Wenger realized he needed to strengthen his defense, so he signed England national team defender Sol Campbell, who made the unheard-of move across North London from Arsenal's rivals Tottenham Hotspur. And the surprise move was announced by Sol Campbell walking into a press conference for the signing of a reserve goalkeeper, completely unannounced to the shock of the journalists present, despite previously saying he would never play for Arsenal. Tottenham fans called him Judas, although can anyone really blame him for wanting to leave Spurs? Arsenal had an inconsistent start to the season, with a defeat against Leeds, sandwiched between 4-0 wins against Middlesbrough and Leicester, and, in typical fashion, there was a November slump, with Arsenal on a run of 4 games without a win, when the champions Manchester United came to Highbury, and 2 awful mistakes by United goalkeeper Fabien Barthez gifted Arsenal the win. But after losing to Newcastle in December, Arsenal turned on the style after Christmas, going unbeaten for the rest of the season and playing some dazzling football, including this incredible goal of the season by Dennis Bergkamp against Newcastle. And after a draw against Southampton in February, Arsenal won 13 games in a row, including a 1-0 win over Manchester United to win Arsene Wenger's second Premier League title, with Thierry Henry the main man for Arsenal, scoring 32 goals in all competitions. But it was Ljungberg and Pire who won the Player of the Season awards, and Arsenal's triumph caused Wenger to say there had been a power shift in the league. And like with Wenger's previous league win, Arsenal did the double, lifting the FA Cup after beating Chelsea 2-0 in the final. But yet again, as great as this season was, the true magic was still yet to come for the Gunners. That summer saw the last of the old guard leave as Lee Dixon and Tony Adams retired, and Patrick Vieira was given the captain's armband. And after going 29 games without being beaten at the end of the previous season, Arsenal started the 02-03 season strongly, going unbeaten in August and September to stretch that unbeaten run even further, leading Wenger to suggest that Arsenal could go a whole season unbeaten. But while lots of teams have won the title by losing just 1 or 2 games a season, the jump from 2 defeats a season to 0 defeats is absolutely enormous, as just one mistake in one game can end your hopes of a perfect season. And in 02-03, Arsenal looked to be heading toward a 1-1 draw with Everton when, in the last minute, Wayne Rooney scored for the Toffees, and Wenger's dream of being invincible went up in smoke. Arsenal lost the next game too, but from mid-December, Arsenal went on another unbeaten run that saw them go 8 points clear at the top of the league and knocked Manchester United out of the FA Cup with a 2-0 win at Old Trafford. Manchester United came back strong, and despite a bruising 2-2 draw between the clubs, where Sol Campbell got sent off for elbowing a United player and Patrick Vieira got injured, the momentum was with the Manchester side, who ended up finishing 5 points ahead of Arsenal to lift the Premier League. The Gunners did win the FA Cup, beating Southampton 1-0 in the final, but Wenger was not happy at all, and he also saw how money effectively decided the league, complaining that every summer Manchester United buy a £30 million player, and now even Chelsea were also starting to spend big money under new owner Roman Abramovich, whereas Arsenal had been signing young players with lots of potential. Unfortunately for Wenger, that was the story of his entire career at Arsenal, and sometimes he doesn't get the credit he deserves for achieving what he did with his restricted budget. Come the next season, and Arsenal looked to strengthen in goal, where they brought in Jens Lehmann from Borussia Dortmund to replace David Seaman, and just like that, Wenger had the final piece of the puzzle in completing arguably the greatest team in English history. And this team was magical, to say the least. I mean, Lehmann in goal, Sol Campbell and Kolo Touré as the center-back duo, Laurent on the right, and the magnificent Cole on the left of defense. A midfield duo of Vieira and Gilberto Silva with Piré and Ljungberg on the wings, and of course, the magical Bergkamp and the frightening Henry leading the line. Safe to say, this team was stacked. Arsenal started the 03-04 season well, winning 4 in a row and drawing their 5th game. But next up was a trip to Old Trafford to take on the champions Manchester United, and this encounter was even more feisty than usual, as Arsenal's Patrick Vieira was sent off in the 80th minute, and then, in the last minute, Arsenal's perfect start was dealt a devastating blow, as Manchester United were given a penalty, which Ruud van Nistelrooy took and smashed it against the crossbar. Arsenal hung on to draw 0-0, but after the game, several Arsenal players confronted Van Nistelrooy, and the FA charged Arsenal with improper conduct and gave the club a huge fine, as well as banning several players for a few games. In the next game against Newcastle, Vieira got injured again and would miss 2 months of games, and Arsenal's style this season had been grittier than before, grinding out results without the flair of previous seasons as they battled a newly minted Chelsea for first place, with Wenger saying that even though Chelsea had a bigger squad, his team was tight-knit and had been together for years. But 3 draws in 4 games saw Arsenal drop behind Manchester United, and the Gunners started January in 2nd place, but interestingly, they had yet to be beaten all season. Wenger decided to strengthen Arsenal's attack by signing Jose Antonio Reyes from Sevilla for £10 million, but it was Thierry Henry who was unstoppable, scoring clever goals like a quickly taken free kick against Aston Villa to wonder strikes against Wolves, as Arsenal had now gone 24 games unbeaten, setting a new club record for the longest unbeaten start to a season. And in February, Thierry Henry scored his 100th goal for the club, who were now top of the table. But their winning run came under threat when Arsenal traveled to Stamford Bridge, where Chelsea scored in the first minute of the game. But Arsenal fought back and won 2-1. And then, at the end of March, Arsenal took on Manchester United again and opened the scoring with a pile-driver long-range goal from Thierry Henry, finishing the match 1-1, which meant the title was basically in the bag. Arsenal were still unbeaten in the league with just 8 games left to play, and Henry was on top form as he scored a hat-trick in the next game, which was a 4-2 win over Liverpool, and a week later scored 4 goals against Leeds. But something magical was about to happen, because the stars well and truly aligned for every Arsenal fan around the world, because next up was Tottenham Hotspur, and the way the league table was set, just a draw for Arsenal meant they would be crowned champions at White Hart Lane, their fiercest rivals' home ground. The match finished 2-2, and Arsenal celebrated winning the league in front of Tottenham's own supporters, which is probably the only time the Spurs fan will ever see aside from North London win a league title at Tottenham Stadium. Arsenal drew the next game 1-1 before beating Fulham and then winning against Leicester on the last day of the season to become the first club to go unbeaten for a whole league season since Preston North End more than a century earlier in 1889, an incredible achievement that gave the squad the title of Invincibles. History had been made. Arsenal kept their unbeaten run going into the next season, getting up to 49 undefeated, but unfortunately, Manchester United stopped them from making it 50 as Van Nistelrooy and Rooney scored to make it 2-0 to Manchester United, ending the invincible run. There was so much bad blood from the game that players had a fight in the tunnel, and Cesc Fabregas allegedly threw a pizza at United manager Alex Ferguson, leaving cheese and tomato on his head and down his suit. That loss started a poor run in the autumn where Arsenal only won one match in 6 games, a thrilling 5-4 win over Spurs, and would eventually finish second in the league, not behind United, but behind Jose Mourinho's Chelsea, as a new era of billionaire owners was about to dominate football. Wenger's side did reach the FA Cup final, where Arsenal beat Manchester United on penalties to win their 4th FA Cup under Wenger, but Arsenal knew they needed more money to compete with the top teams in the league, so the following season would be their last at their historic Highbury Stadium, as they planned to move to the large and modern Emirates Stadium. But this move meant sacrifices on the pitch, as Wenger was forced to save money and rely on youth players. But in the 2004-05 season, Arsene Wenger had one more shot of absolute glory, beating Real Madrid, Juventus, and Villarreal in the Champions League to reach the final against Barcelona. Unfortunately, a controversial red card to goalkeeper Jens Lehmann meant Arsenal were forced to play most of the game with 10 men. But they took the lead through Sol Campbell and hung on until the 76th minute before eventually losing 2-1, meaning the Gunners were left heartbroken on the European stage. Over the next years, Wenger's Arsenal struggled to compete with the money of their rivals and often finished 3rd or 4th in the league, although they came close to winning the title in 2008 when their charge was undone by a horrific tackle to Eduardo against Birmingham. Wenger eventually retired in 2018 after a few more FA Cup wins and 22 years at the helm. But Wenger's legacy is not just measured in trophies or even his insane invincible season of 2003-04, but how he changed English football forever, transforming it from men playing Route 1 hoofball between drinking sessions to one of sports science, nutrition, and worldwide scouting. And you could even go so far as to say Wenger's legacy is that he created the modern Premier League as we know it today. Now, if you enjoyed this video, subscribe and I'll make more just like it. And why not check out the one on screen now, because it is a crazy story too.